Evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dan Kovatz. I am the Executive Director of the Illinois Democratic County Chairs Association. Thank you for joining us for our next installment of our virtual training series. And tonight, I think we've got a real good one lined up for you. So we've been getting a lot of questions about November and different election judges' responsibilities and poll watching, what we can and what we can't do. And we thought, instead of trying to answer these questions one at a time, let's do a training on this and get out the correct information. So before I turn it over to our president to introduce our presenter tonight, a couple of things I do want to kind of go over some of the ground rules for tonight's training. So we've got a wide range of people with experience. Some people who are going to be first-time election judges in November, some people who have 20 plus years of being an election judge, and this is kind of a refresher for them. So we just ask you to be respectful of everyone's experience and make sure, as they're commenting on things, just be respectful of what they're doing as well. The training is going to last about an hour. So if you need to get up, stretch your legs, get a glass of water, go to the restroom, make sure you do that, but make sure you're trying to stay as present as possible during the session as we're going along. And the last thing is there's no stupid questions tonight. All right. Again, we've got a lot of different experience and a lot of questions you might have that somebody else might be thinking as well. Everyone's going to be muted during the session. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. And as we're going along, we'll either answer the questions or we'll wait till the end and we'll get them at the tail end of the session. So again, thank you for joining us this evening. And with that, I will turn it over to President Christina Zahorek to introduce our presenter.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see everybody. A lot of familiar faces and a lot of new people. So I'm really excited. We've got a full house. I wanted to say a couple of things. One, I just think a really big thank you to all of you who stepped up to be Democratic election judges this cycle, because we are in the middle of a pandemic, which you all are aware, and this election is an incredibly important election for us in our lifetimes. We all know that. And the fact that we've had so many Democrats from across the state step up either to be appointed by their parties or to be commissioned for the 2-year term by their parties and their county boards, I think is really, really important. And I just want to say thank you for doing your duty, not only just your civic duty, but your patriotic duty, because there is a reason why the statutes require a Democratic and a Republican judge in that space. And for all of those who are stepping up to be vote by mail judges in your counties, I also want to say thank you for stepping up and doing that important role as well. That being said, I think that we have a really good resource tonight with us, and that is Circuit Clerk Mark von Nida. He has been serving in a elected role either as Circuit Clerk or as the County Clerk in Madison County. He also was the Madison County Democratic Party Chair for a number of years as well. So I'm really grateful and thankful. He stepped down from his party partisan role, and I am thankful he came back tonight to offer some insight to all of those who have stepped up to be Democratic election judges. And I would also say, I think there's also on this phone call people that are perhaps interested in being poll watchers, which are folks that are in the polling place, either at early voting satellite sites or on election day to monitor things. And I know we also have some rank and file Democrats who just want to make sure that they understand what their rights are and what the process is in terms of voting in the polling place. So again, thank you for being here tonight, and I turn it over to you, Mark.
All right. What I do want to tell you, if you are a county chair, there are going to be variables and variations across counties and across election authorities. So if you don't have a relationship with your county clerk, and I understand that, you need to have one. And even if it's a bad one, they owe you information. They owe you information about things like who are the election judges. They should have published a list of election judges so that's yours. Who are the election judges who are processing, analyzing, processing, and counting the vote by mail ballots. That's information that she should go over with them and know how they're going to go about doing that. Prior to the election, and this is something that everybody should know, there are pre-election tests that happen for the equipment. So there is something called a public test. A notice is required to tell you when and where the public test is, and I really do encourage the county chair in particular to be there. Anybody, it's public, can be there and ask questions and see that the equipment is working properly. Little story, just the most famous election meltdown really in recent history was Florida, Palm Beach County, Florida. The Democratic county chair would have been paying attention. He or she would have seen the butterfly ballot that split the votes between candidates for president. And because of the butterfly ballot, it wasn't obvious that people were actually voting for third-party candidates instead of the Democrat or Republican, and that made a difference. It really did elect George Bush president. So that's why the county chairs really need to be there. They need to see the ballots. They need to see the tests. They need to have list of who and when we're processing the vote by mail ballots in particular, as well as the early voting ballots. I'm using, by the way, this PowerPoint was done by Heather Weir-Vaught, who is a lawyer for the state Democratic Party. She put it together. So I'm really thankful for her to allow me to use it. So important issues for election judges. I do want to say that a lot of people ask this about election judges. Why do you have to be a party? Why do you have to declare a party? The same reason you have to declare a party for a primary. Primary elections, you declare a party so you can vote. And we don't register in Illinois as a Democrat or Republican. So a person is what they say they are when they say they are. So a Republican can become a Democrat. We hold out hope for all of them. So do keep in mind, but if somebody has switched from Republican to Democrat, you might want to know about it and check them out. The way that the precinct makeup of election judges is determined is based on the gubernatorial vote for the decade. So it's the average of the last 3 elections by that precinct. So that will determine what the majority is. If that precinct has been a majority Democratic precinct in gubernatorial vote over the last decade, the majority will be Dems. And that comes into play when it comes to challenges. We'll talk about that. Let's see how we. Oh, I think you're moving for me. Okay. And of course, that's it, is that there is an exception here for registered voters. Now 16, 17-year-old students, high school students, can, with the permission from their school, be student election judges. And what we found is that, especially in the primary election and with COVID coming, a lot of our elderly election judges kind of bowed out at the last minute. So you can expect a lot of student judges, and that's kind of a moving target that the chair or the person who's kind of managing, keeping track of the judges should keep an eye on, make sure that these students are there and ready to help. What I found as an election authority myself is that the students were great. They were serious, they learned, and they followed directions really well. So elected precinct committee people cannot be election judges. So when after the primary, what should have happened when you were elected, if somebody was elected as a precinct committee person, they were consulted about election judges. If that didn't happen in the next go round for the next term, you should insert yourself into who the election judges are. Okay, let's keep going there. Election judges obviously are responsible for the administration of the election procedures. They're there all day long. There's no provision for split shifts or anything like that. You are there at 5 a.m. to open up at 6, and you're all the way there until you're done counting. 9 p.m. is kind of normal, but it can last a little bit longer. For this election, November 2020, for those counties that have less than 250,000, you may have 3 election judges instead of the typical 5. That will be rough for those 3 judges. So it's more important that the 3 people that are there know what they're doing. And by the way, as we go to the next screen, I think it talks about what kind of judges that there are. There's really no such thing as a chief judge, head judge, but in almost every precinct there usually is a person who has seniority that kind of guides things, that has the experience to let people know what's going on. But know this: if you are an election judge, you have the same authority as that person. And if you think that something that they're doing is wrong, you do have the authority to challenge them, to challenge a voter, and to make sure that voters are being assisted when needed, to verify voter qualifications, all those things. Now, what's very important here is that what election judges are doing, I like to say, it's somewhat like CSI. In reality, what you're doing is that you're creating a paper trail, a chain of evidence. And really everything that you do, everything that you touch, everything that you have is actually, you should think of as an election judge, to think of as evidence. And whether it's somebody signing an affidavit, that affidavit could come up to court, could be used in court. Whether you're signing off on a piece of paper that says we received 100 ballots and we used 99 of them. Those are all going to be evidence, that all could be evidence for later on for verifying that what happened in that polling place is exactly what happened in that polling place. So let's go to the next. And this is what I was saying, is that head judge, although they don't have the authority, often they're the one person who will call back to the county clerk, or been designated to call to the election authorities' offices. And I think it just makes for a good time. On election day, especially a general election, the phones are ringing off the hook back at the election authorities' office. So if one person from the polling place is calling, you're more likely to get through, more likely to get a good answer. So that doesn't mean, though, that any election judge doesn't have the authority to actually contact the election authority in question. Wait a second, are we doing this right? I'm not sure. So healthcare judges, by the way, that's something that if you're an election official, or if you're a county chair, you should know about, is that the weekend, beginning that Friday before election day, there are judges that will be going to healthcare facilities, to the nursing homes, to vote to people and the residents at the nursing homes. So that is an area that you should know about, when they're going, who's going, and if you want to have poll watchers there. So it's probably behooves a county chair to have some backup judges on, have some list of people who might be available, and to make sure that they do know things about what to do on election day, because there are call-offs, and they don't have to necessarily live in the precinct. They can travel as long as they live in the county. So next slide. Obviously, all judges are equal, but they must follow procedures. It's fairly makes sense that our goal is to have a fair and impartial election. And again, as far as Democrats are concerned, we don't need to cheat. We just want fair and impartial, and that'll let our people vote. We're going to talk about campaign-free zones, but maintain order in the polling place, how to deal with poll watchers that are overly aggressive, that the judges have the authority to do that. Ensure that all persons in the polling place are not engaged in electioneering, obviously. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Judges cannot wear any, even though you may be a Democratic judge, showing up with your Illinois Democratic paraphernalia is not a good idea. No Democratic or no political party or campaign paraphernalia is allowed. Electioneering obviously is something that has to take place outside. Sometimes it doesn't matter if if a voter comes in and they're particularly a problem, you can ask them not to be not to be a problem, but you can't harass them or cause harm to anybody. If there's a problem, that's when you call the police. Okay. And that brings back the voters, election judges, poll watchers. We'll talk about what poll watchers are, but obviously law enforcement are able to come in, police officers. Media sometimes will come and do a remote and polling, from the polling place. They have to have permission. You should hear from the election authority if that's the case. And also, sometimes you see posters, exit polls. They'll come, but they're usually intercepting people on their way out of the polling place, and you won't see them inside the polling place. So, poll watchers are sometimes called challengers. They're not the election judges. They're different from the election judges. They work for a candidate, or they can represent a political candidate or a political party or a political committee. They have to be registered in Illinois. They don't necessarily have to be registered in the county. If they're registered in Illinois, they can be a poll watcher. Credentials. If you're a county chair, you should be able to get credentials from the election authority. They give you blank pieces of paper and you can fill them out with the poll watcher's name in there and have your signature on there. Committees can do that, and candidates can also get those credentials. Poll watchers have to present those credentials when they do enter the polling place. In a lot of cases, and again, what you can expect is that there's a log of poll watchers at the polls, and again, the election judges would have the responsibility for logging a poll watcher in and logging them out. Poll watchers can come and go, but they should log in and log out. They do surrender their poll watcher credentials to the judges when they come in for the first time.
Hey, Mark, can I jump in with a question real quick here?
Sure.
Because I think this is something that poll watchers, sometimes we don't remember. If you go into a polling location, there's multiple precincts that are voting at that location. Do you have to put down a credential at each one, or just
have to
the
have a-
one that you're watching?
That's a very important distinction. You have to have a poll watcher credential for each one of those precincts. You can't. There's not a universal poll watcher credential. You would have to surrender them to each precinct. So it's not unusual. I mean, what you can do if you're a chair is you can get blank forms and make copies of them. Your signature can be a facsimile signature on it. And then, so a poll watcher, let's say that they are, in some cases, what we do is we send poll watchers out to different polling places to collect the number of voters at midday, for example, so that we can kind of project turnout and see how we're doing with turnout. They're going to need a whole big stack of poll watcher credentials to go into each one of those polling places and each one of those precincts to collect those numbers. So there are some restrictions on the number of poll watchers that you can have representing candidates and political parties. If we have a problem where we have more than 2 poll watchers representing political parties in a precinct, they probably are needed someplace else. So I mean, I don't know of any realistic problem where we've had that. However, I will say this, is that if election judges may be confused and think that they can ask, for example, the Democratic poll watcher to leave because they're the 6th person in. They have a lot of poll watchers for different candidates or whatever. The poll watcher for the Democratic Party is one allowed for the Democratic Party. There's 2 allowed representing a candidate. There's 1 representing a civic organization, and so on. So it's not a limit on the total number of poll watchers that can be in a precinct. It's a limit on the number that are representing the same people.
Mark, before you continue, I also just want to point out that in the situation with poll watchers as well, you know, certainly we've had it in our county on occasion where you would have to surrender credentials every time you came in and out of the polling place. So again, it's important to check with your county chair and who can then check with the authority to see, you know, what they're playing by that year. And then the other thing to remember about the poll watchers is you're talking about representing each precinct. And we now know that in many of our counties, these polling places have many precincts in them, right? So, and it becomes, I think, a little bit problematic when, you know, during the pandemic, if you've got, in some cases, 6 to 10 precincts in one polling place. And now you've got a myriad of people that are wanting to be in that space. Something to think about or pay attention to, at least.
Right. One person can have credentials for each one of those polling places. Now, I think Rock Island is one of the counties where they actually have combined precincts where they're more than one precinct actually in a spot. And again, I think that's something you're going to have to check with the election authority to see how that they're running that. Again, in some cases, and there's variables among the counties, and there's variables among the actual precincts, the election judges themselves. Sometimes, you know, these are folks who are, they've showed up to a training, and, you know, they're doing this once or twice a year, so they may not know. But technically what should happen is you surrender your credentials one time, they keep those, and you log in and out and have entry. Sometimes I've heard of them where they require you to come back in. And probably what's best is to have that, if you have a poll watcher, to issue them multiple pieces of paper that are the poll watcher credentials, just so that they're covered in all those cases. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. So poll watchers, this is one of those things that just really important. Poll watchers are watchers, they're not touchers. So you should know this, that poll watchers should not be touching any of the election materials. Going back to our thing of CSI, collecting evidence, collecting a chain of custody. Nobody but the election judges touched it. But the poll watcher does have a right to look at the equipment and inspect it to make sure it starts out. And poll watcher can be there before the polling place opens to make sure you start out at 0, that the election equipment has been reset from the test to make sure it starts at a 0. Now, you can stand behind the election judge and observe the issuance of ballots. One of the things that we have is many cases, what you have is you have people who have poll watchers credentials that are there that are keeping track of who has voted on election day, so they can run an get out the vote operation, knock and pull, and so keeping track of who has voted is very important. So that's one of those things where you are allowed to be close enough that you can hear the name of the person who's requesting a ballot so that you can mark them off of the list. Now, once again, it depends on the county, it depends on the situation. In some cases, there's a friendly kind of a banter between the election judges and the poll watcher, but I would not expect that the election judges in all cases will allow you to go back and look through look through the applications to see who's voted. If you weren't there at the beginning and haven't kept track of it all day long, you should not have an expectation from the election judges to let you know who has voted before you got there. So having somebody there for the entire time, marking down a list it's really a very effective way of making sure that you pull all of the voters from your precinct. Now, poll watchers do have a right to actually request to compare a voter's signature or challenge that voter. If you see somebody, you see something that's happening, you do have a right to challenge a voter. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Again, notifying the election judges if you think that something is happening that's not appropriate, not proper. As a poll watcher, you politely bringing it up to the election judges. Again, you can't, as a poll watcher, you don't have the authority there, the election judges do, but you can notify, if you see something, you can say something you can notify the election authority. In the county setup, the county chairs, the leadership of should be the ones that have a number that the poll watchers can contact to then kind of get the election authority involved. And again, if the election authority isn't going to get involved, isn't going to insist on things being done properly, we do have the right to contact the Attorney General's office. And the Attorney General, by the way, does have staff throughout the state that can respond to some of these things. So if you see a poll watcher is there to watch, if they see something that's not right, don't interfere. Don't speak directly to the voters, but you can call somebody. Of course, poll watchers shouldn't be discussing politics or engage in electioneering. Voters come in, they might know you. They might know the poll watcher. They might say something political. It's best to just kind of say, hey, no, thank you. We can't do that right here in the polling place. I'll talk to you about it later. And again, poll watchers are watchers, not touchers. Don't touch the election equipment or any of the materials. And the election judges are the ones that have the authority there. If you see something that you don't like, you can bring it up, but you really can't step in and insist that they not do it. You can call somebody to do that. Next. And again, I mentioned this, that the Attorney General staff have staff throughout the state, and in a lot of cases they're roaming on election day, and they go and visit the precincts. In some cases, the state's attorney office has people on staff that are roaming, and that, but they usually designate people who know election law at the state's attorney's office, and that's something that the county chair should do, is have a contact at the state's attorney's office if need be. Excessive law enforcement, I see this as a possible problem. I've never run into it. I've had a great relationship with cops in terms of helping me more so than hurting. But you know, I have seen this, is that I had an early voting site at a police station, and I had members of the community come to me and say, hey, not everybody finds the police station as welcoming as you might, Mark. And I kind of responded to that by moving the polling station away from the police station. So if you're a county chair and you do have a situation like that, do keep that in mind. That's something for a future election. At this point, the polling places are more or less set in stone. But those may not be appropriate for everybody in the community, because again, they don't find it as welcoming as I might. Challenging a voter's ability to vote. Now, this is really important. In Illinois, the presumption is that the voter is there to vote, and they have a right to vote. So challenging a voter to cast a ballot is very, very important, something you should be reluctant to do. Election judges can do it, but if they do, there are several things that can come into play in terms of helping that voter to vote. And as a poll watcher and as an election judge, you should know this. Anybody that's in the polling place, a poll watcher, election judge, or even another voter can say, hey, wait a second, this person doesn't live here. This person's not the same person that they say they are. If they bring that up, then that's the case. I think it's going to be kind of interesting, because people wearing masks may be a little different in terms of identifying folks, but I haven't had a problem recognizing people just by their eyes.
Mark, I'm just going to interject. The masks, you don't need to identify the person. You're basing their ability on their signature.
That's true.
So it's not. That's why you don't ask for an ID in part, right? When you're actually in the precinct.
Well, I mean, there are some cases where somebody voted by are registered by mail and did not provide any ID. They may be asked to present ID for the first time. And then, I registered to vote when I was 18 years old. I'm a little bit older now, quite a bit older now. My signatures changed. A lot of people's signatures have changed. And so, yes, that's one of the things. They compare signatures. They're not really experts in this, but that you may be challenged. You may be asked for ID. If the election judge is asking every single person for ID, that's a problem. And that's, again, you should contact the election authority and get that straightened out. And if that's not if the election authority doesn't do anything about it, you take it higher up to Attorney General, state's attorneys. The challenge is a challenge to a voter, by the way. Not, when somebody says, I challenge it, I don't think that this is the right person, it goes to the election judges, and actually they're a panel. They're going to vote. And this is why, going back to this business of Democrat Republicans and setting up the majority as one and the other, a majority rules in this case on a challenge. If somebody's challenge is upheld and they say, well, you don't get to vote, they still have a right to vote a provisional ballot. And we're going to talk about a provisional ballot as we go along here. But it's a ballot that they get to mark. It gets sequestered and set aside in an envelope, and it goes and the decision's made on it later on. So that's basically on a challenge. Now, some things, if you're an election judge or a poll watcher, that you should keep in mind, and I think it comes up on the next screen, I'm not sure, but let's go to the next screen just to make sure. There may be no registration record for that voter. The voter comes in and says, hey, and they go, well, we don't have you. They're probably in the wrong polling place. And it's important that we find out and get them to the right polling place for reasons, the reasons that to get their vote counted, it's important. And people don't know. I mean, it's kind of funny because because of the way boundaries are. Somebody could live close to the boundaries of a precinct, but their polling place actually is a couple miles away. And there's a polling place within a couple blocks, but it's not their precinct. And so naturally, I mean, just being a normal person, you would go to the branch that's closest to you, but it's not your precinct. And that's why they don't have a registration record for that person. Even if they voted a provisional ballot in the wrong precinct, it wouldn't count. So that's why we have to get them to the right polling place. So the first thing happens when somebody doesn't have a registration record for that voter is make sure they're in the right place. In some cases, a voter no longer resides at the given address. If they move within 30 days of the election, they still vote at that same address. If they just moved within the same month as the election, they vote at the same precinct, but they just have to fill out an affidavit that gives the new address. The person attempting to vote is not the same person as registered. Again, ID, not ID. If a system indicates the voter already voted either during early voting or vote by mail. Now, do keep in mind that sometimes there are two people that have the same name. Junior, they're not necessarily registered as junior, but father voted early, our son voted early, father showed up to vote. So that could come into play. If the voter, we'll talk about that, actually, there's a screen about it, what you do if somebody voted early or voted by mail. If the system indicated that they requested a vote by mail ballot, there's also procedures that go into play here. So we'll go into those. I kind of went over this, and I can't overemphasize it enough. If the person voted, verify the person's in the correct precinct. I had somebody that there again, these multiple precincts in a single polling place, they could be on the wrong side of the room. And the thing is if you do the wrong thing, like get them a provisional ballot, that ballot's not going to count. It's get them in the right side of the room, the place where they're supposed to be. This is not a bad time to verify with the election authority if the person was registered. Sometimes that's one way to find out if they're in the right polling place. Again, what we as precinct committee persons, one of the things, the services that you can provide for your voters is there are multiple websites. The State Board of Election has a website, and some counties have websites where you can verify your voter registration ahead of time. Keep in mind things like this. My name is Von Nida. It's 2 words, VON space NIDA. But in terms of the in terms of the voter registration rolls, it's all 1 word. So things like names like McCormick or St. Peter's, they have, it depends on the election authorities' standards on how those were logged in, so that you have to find multiple variations of it. Look for multiple variations of the name if you're looking online to see that. And again, if the election judges, every time there's a problem comes up, they're automatically giving away a provisional ballot, that's actually a problem, because it may be that that ballot won't be counted later on. So again, we're going to talk about some of these different situations, but if they are doing that, automatically giving a person a provisional ballot every time, there should be, it's a rare occurrence. It really is a rare occurrence, and it should be less than 10 in any polling place, even on a presidential general election. Yeah, again, people are not required to show their ID, but if a voter is challenged, they can be asked to show some ID. If they don't have their ID, they're still not sent away. I mean, we still have options here, but and again, residency, if they moved within 30 days, they still vote at that precinct. If they have moved more than 30 days to a different precinct, we need to find out the right precinct for them to go to, and then they do same-day registration. By the way, that's something as a county chair should have established with the county clerk or the election authority. Do you have same-day registration centers, or is it being taken care of at the polling place? It should be taken care of at the polling place. However, some of the larger jurisdictions will have same-day registration centers, like at the university, if it's Champaign County, and what that does is that allows for people who know what they're doing, can go through the proper procedure. And here's why it's important. It's not for president, it's not for governor, it's at the state representative level, it's at the alderman level. There are different variations of the ballot, and if you're in the wrong place, you may be voting on the wrong offices that you're not entitled to, and that's the reason that the law doesn't allow for you to vote in the wrong place. So the same-day registration, election day registration, or grace period registration, you go to a center, and the person goes to a center, and then they make sure that they get the right ballot. In some jurisdictions, they're doing it at the polling place, and that's fine. If they move longer than 30 days, they fill out a same-day registration, and they still get to vote. Okay. All right, so this is I've actually gone over this before, but if you're a poll watcher and you are challenging a voter, you have to have a reason, and it doesn't say, it doesn't look like so and so. It's that I know them, and this is it. And again, in Illinois, the presumption is that a voter has a right to vote. That person presents themselves to vote, they're going to vote. Now, we do believe that Republicans would be more likely the person that's in there kind of challenging voters all the time, challenging, and that is a problem. And the election judges can can ask that poll watcher to stop or leave. And if they don't, again, that's one that would be something to escalate up to the county chair, the county clerk, or the state's attorney. Yeah, and like I said, signatures change. Some, signatures change over the years. Especially as you get older, sometimes you have maybe some mobility or dexterity issues, and so the signatures change. ID can fix that. If the person listed as previously, I can't actually read the whole thing, attests that they did not, okay, so somebody is marked as having voted, they have a number of options. And one of them is that if they requested an absentee a vote by mail ballot and the vote by mail ballot did not arrive, they can sign an affidavit that says that they never received it. If they received it, but they didn't mark it and send it back in, they can surrender. They can come on election day and surrender that ballot. And again, that'll come into play here. I think maybe, it's kind of hard to know how this is going to go with the post office and the Republican attempts to undermine vote by mail. But it could be that a person's just not totally comfortable after requesting the ballot. They can take the ballot to the polling place, turn it in, and then vote a regular election day ballot. Now, if it says that they've voted and that the ballot's been received, the voter is entitled to a provisional ballot, because again, sometimes this is sometimes these things, the record keeping is mistaken, and they marked the wrong person's ballot as coming back when it didn't. So a provisional ballot, again, is sequestered aside, is put into an envelope with the important information. That goes back election night. It hasn't been counted yet. And then the election authority, using the same 3-judge panel that will determine for the other vote by ballot mail BBMs, will make a determination. They'll have time. They'll have 7 to 14 days to make a determination on that. And again, we found mistakes get made. We found provisional ballots that should have been counted, obviously. Let's keep going there, Dan. Again, if the voter surrenders a ballot, they should be permitted to vote a regular ballot. If somebody has said that they voted and the ballot's been counted and they're coming back in, it can be challenged. It should be challenged. That's where a provisional ballot comes into play. I think I went over this already. That they didn't receive it. There's what typically election judges have is a sheet that has a whole range of different scenarios of that's just a matter of check marking and having the voter. But now remember, when a voter signs an affidavit, they're swearing that this is the case. And again, it's just like an affidavit is just like court testimony. And if they were lying, I mean, it can come back on them. So it's an important safeguard, but it's a safeguard for the voter as well as the system. We've already went over that. Voters assistance now, you know, if you're a poll watcher and you walk into the polling place and there are multiple people in the voting booth, that may be a problem. But it is allowed under certain circumstances for language assistance. With the Help America Vote Act, all precincts have equipment that helps assist voters that are blind to be able to mark a ballot. But my experience is that that not everybody's comfortable with that, and they still want to have assistance. Now, a ballot marking assistance, they could have a friend, a member of the family. Again, there's an affidavit for that situation that has to be signed by the person. The person that is blind, they make a mark, and it has to be signed by the person who is doing the assistance, saying that they're going to do that. In other cases, 2 election judges, 1 from each party, can assist somebody in voting. Yeah, we have quite a few jurisdictions that have multiple languages required. I think it's a 10%, according to the census, it's a 10% threshold for multiple language ballots. So quite a few of our counties in northern Illinois have Spanish ballots, and I think Chicago, I can't remember exactly, but it's quite a few. It's Chinese, Tagalog, they have multiple ballots. And of course, they should have access to all of those. If somebody needs translation services, that is something that the election authority needs to do. Campaign free zone, that's one that there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. It's 100 feet from the polling room, 100 feet from the door to where the polling place is taking place. The exception, of course, is that private property and churches can designate their entire property as campaign-free zone. Campaign-free zone means that there's no signs, buttons, shirts, all that is not supposed to be taking place. A lot of our campaigns, a lot of our county organizations do go out and put signs up approximate to the polling place. Public property such as schools have to allow those signs. I've had it where community colleges take it upon themselves to try to remove those signs, and I've had to go back to them and let them show them the law that if it's public property, you have to, and there's voting going on, they have to allow those signs to be within 100 feet of the polling room. So there should be some kind of cone. In some cases they use flags, or in some cases they use tape to keep it up. Again, and a lot of places will have people who are passing sample ballots or materials out by a polling place. They have to stay outside the campaign free zones. Now, it's tough nut, man, on the ones where their churches, where people are driving onto the property, parking, and then walking into the polling place. You really, the best you can do is get the signs out on the perimeters of the property. And what I have seen, and this is a good one for county chairs to be thinking of, is that it is actually having people who put the sign on a stick and position themselves at the polling place. So in those cases where the voters are getting in and you can't really hand them anything or anything like that, you can have a presence. And the fact of the matter is, having a person with the sign as people are driving by, it generates visibility for our campaign, visibility for our candidates, and And actually, if they drive past 2 or 3 polling places, it seems like that your campaign was everywhere. And so I've seen it. It's been very successful. So just something to keep in mind on those cases. I don't know. I mean, it's campaign free is exactly it. It's campaign free. The law does provide that you can. The funny thing about it is the law does provide that public property must allow you to put those signs outside of the campaign free zone or 100 feet away from the door to the polling place. So provisional voting is just that. I mean, these are ballots that are cast, and they're going to be counted, provided that we can, determine that they should have been cast on election day. One of the things I can say to the county chairs is that you want to determine as quickly as possible with the election authority who these folks are that that voted a provisional ballot, because you have 7 days to rehabilitate those ballots. Let's say that they were challenged, they didn't have any ID on them, and that's something you should know. If you're a poll watcher or election judge, county chair, a person can't be sent away completely. If the challenge is upheld, they still have a right to do a provisional ballot. And then they have 7 days to show up at the offices of the election authority and show that ID and rehabilitate that ballot so that it can be counted. If they're not found on the unofficial list, again, it's really important that we make sure that they're in the right place. 9 times out of 10, I probably even 99 out of 100 times, they're just in the wrong place. Voters' voting status has been challenged. The majority of election judges agree with the challenge. Again, they have a right to a provisional ballot. And again, if they don't have ID on election day, they can show up with ID. And if they don't, even if it's been challenged and they showed ID show up at the election authority and show that you did show ID, because that ballot still can be counted. I mentioned this, that people who registered by mail, they sent in a mail-in registration, they're going to be asked for the first time that they vote to show some ID. That's a good, that's a good safeguard. But they show up and they don't have their ID. They can vote a provisional ballot. They still got a chance to do it. There's another reason for to have provisional voting, and that's if a court orders to extend the time of closing polls. Now, if a person is in line at 7 p.m. when the polls close, that person gets to vote. And typically what they would do is put somebody at the end of that line, and everybody that's in line, just because the poll's supposed to close at 7, if you got a big long line out there, and this may come into play, this election, everybody that was in line at 7 gets to vote. Now, if a court orders the polling place to have extended period of time, is everybody that comes to the line after 7 o'clock is going to vote a provisional ballot. And again, that's going to be determined by more, they're going to go to court on those ballots, but there is a provision for people if the media tells the court have extended the polling times. That's what's going to come into play. And again, if it shows that the person voted in the records, they're going to have to sort it out in most cases. You want to be there when they process this. You want it explained to you if you're the county chair. You want to keep track of those. I mean, typically, this is in a county where, in the county of Madison, where we would have something like 120 to 140,000 ballots cast. I think that there was probably about 350 provisional ballots total. So they're rare, and you should know about all of them. You should have a list, and you should know about all of them as soon as you can if you're the county chair, and follow up on those. And again, people, you know, that just showed up and didn't have ID, bird dog them, because those ballots count. People who are showing up for same-day registration don't have the proper documents. They do have time, 7 to 14 days to show up with the stuff. So keep track of them, run them down. I already said this, I don't know how many times, but I can't say it enough about making sure somebody's in the right precinct. If the voter's not registered, again, this person, if there's same-day registration. So if there's a problem with their registration, it used to be that if they moved more than 30 days prior to the election, they could vote still a federal ballot. And there's no need for federal ballots anymore. They can do same-day registration, and it's just a matter of whether or not you want to direct them to, if in your county you have same-day registration sites. I would direct people to those sites because it's safest for the voter. The people know what they're doing there. Again, I think you'll get a lot of questions about this, people who have ballots and they didn't get around to sending them in. Don't worry, send them in, you know, show up at the polls, bring the ballot with you. So thanks, Dan. Right. Issues to watch. Election judges requiring ID from every voter. That's something that you see, you say something, escalate it. Constant challenges. Again, if there's a poll watcher in there that's constantly challenged voters or elections, I have seen election judges who are overly partisan, who just, you know, they just seem to challenge voters that, you know, challenge African-American voters constantly, but nobody else. Escalate that. Refusing to utilize all the voting booths, turning on the equipment is obviously a problem. And the reason that is because it slows everything down. You know, if they're not utilizing all the equipment, and again, you know, I've actually seen this where they didn't bother to use some of the booths because they use the plugs for their crock pots for their lunch. If they don't have all the booths set up, they need to have all the booths set up. If they aren't going to do it, it needs to be escalated. Obviously, election judges are like people, and there's sometimes they act out. The county clerk or the election authority needs to know about that. If the lines are really long, you should escalate that out. Let the county clerk know. Let the county chair know. Same thing. Heavy police presence that may in some places be considered voter intimidation. It should be questioned. And again, if the local authorities don't want to do anything about it, the U.S. attorney or the attorney general have people that are out that are on call. By the way, we can provide numbers for the U.S. attorney and the attorney general. So there we are. I hope I got it in a reasonable amount of time to allow for a bunch of questions there, Dan. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. There is another one here. Remember, after the polls closed, poll watchers are allowed in the polls after they close. You can see everything processed, counting out the ballots. Again, how do we know? You know, how do we know these things are straight up? A certain number of ballots are sent. Blank ballots are sent to a precinct. That's kept track of. How many ballots have been used? That should match up with the number of people who voted, and then, you know, and the actual number and who voted is kept track of. How they voted, we don't know, but who voted is kept track of. And then that's something for, double entry bookkeeping later on. The number of people who voted equals the number of votes that were cast. How do we, who it is that's voted would equal, real live actual persons that you can go back and check on. So that processing all happens with the election judges. They still have a bunch of work to do, even though the counting has more or less been automated through time. However, there is one area where that comes into play, and that is write-in candidates. If you have a write-in candidate in your election in your county, those are going to have to be hand counted, because the thing is that often the case that people don't necessarily write in the actual write-in candidate's name. They write in Mickey Mouse or whatever. So the number of write-ins doesn't necessarily equal votes for the write-in candidate. And again, it may be the case that write-in is particularly important to our party in any given time, or the people that you're poll watching for. Notably, you're allowed to be there when they run the tapes on the tabulator, and you can ask for a tape from the tabulator. Also, one of the provisions is that they take a tape and they post it on the door. They post it outside the polling place, and failing to giving you a tape, you can copy from the tape that they're posting. And again, all the law enforcement and the State Board of Elections and all those other folks can be there. But those are the two main reasons. You want to watch processing, keep an eye out for irregularities as far as write-in votes, and it's helpful in a lot of cases. If you get a tape, you can beat the information going out back to the election night party and show everybody the results before it actually hits the totals out there. So.
Great, thank you, Mark. There's a lot of kind of questions coming through on the chat box, and we'll try to make sure that we're able to answer as many as we can. But I know time is precious, and I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a takeaway from the things that you presented. Really, there's kind of three buckets of people that we're talking about on whether it's early vote, early satellite, or on election day, right? And we're talking about Democratic election judges. We're talking about the county chair's responsibilities and poll watcher responsibilities. And for the county chairs, you listed a few things that they should be on a lookout for. One is making sure they are viewing the public testing of the machines, making sure they know and understand who the election judges are, particularly obviously the Democratic election judges, because again, not only the party is appointing Democratic judges, but now the clerks are also appointing Democratic election judges, right? So we want to know who our people are. We want our people to feel connected and to know where they can go if and when they have questions. We want to know, as county chairs, how your election authority, I think there's like 109 election authorities in the state of Illinois, and each election authority does things slightly differently, right? So you want to know, as the county chair, what your election authority is doing in terms of how they are processing their vote by mail ballots. Are they doing it starting September 24th when they send them out the very next day and they get some in? Are they processing that day? You know, what are they having election judges taking them from those drop boxes or wherever they are to the processing place, right? All that information, as a county chair, you're going to want to know. You're also you're going to want to know who your poll watchers are, and to set up a list of who those poll watchers are and where they're going to go. Normally, our precinct people outside of Cook County or even in Cook County will go to their precinct to poll watch, but you may not have a precinct person for every polling place or precinct. So you're going to want to make sure you start to develop a list of volunteers who are willing to be dispersed on election day and or on early voting sites as well, or even as they're processing the vote by mail ballots, right? And those poll watchers, you're going to want to make sure that they have access to credentials, that perhaps they have a form for poll watching, because as Mark said, you're there to observe and to collect evidence. I know in our county, we have a general form that we use that says, this is the poll watcher, this is where they were poll watching, this was the time, and this is what they observed. You want a chain of command that's given to those who are out poll watching, right? Of who they can call if they see something or what they should do. Then we have the election judges, Democratic election judges. We're making sure right now, many of them are going through training right now. Is there any additional training that the organization or the party can provide, or at least a point of reference if they're having problems? We know that they're looking in most counties for additional Democratic election judges, and understanding that you as the county chair have the ability to appoint more. We just can't say where they're going to be placed. That will be up to the election authority at this point. And then the third bucket are the poll watchers. And again, understanding what your role is, being prepared. With regard to PPE, we do know that some of the election authorities will be providing PPE materials for the polling place and for their election judges. But again, that doesn't necessarily address the voter that's coming into the space. So there's a question I think that has to be fleshed out a little bit. And I certainly know that the IDCCA sits with a group with the Democratic Party of Illinois in trying to troubleshoot some of these other questions like these masks. So we will hopefully have a better understanding of kind of what the situation is as we move closer to election day. And then I think that's what I got from you, Mark. And again, I think the bottom line really is that most people are doing their civic duty that want to step up and do this. And for the most part, it's just human error. It's not maliciousness. But we do know from the other side of the aisle that there has been this narrative of misinformation, disinformation, lying. The Republican Party put out a missive to try to recruit, what was it, 500,000 or 50,000? I can't remember now. It's a big difference in number. But people to come in and take back their elections, right? Illinois is not necessarily one of those targeted states, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't see some issues. So it's really important, again, to be connected with your party, be connected with your fellow Democratic judges and poll watchers, and keep vigilant. And again, vote early. Vote early. And if you've got a vote by mail ballot and you're worried about it, turn it in early. Whether you drop it off at the post office or in the postal box, or you turn it into your election authority, or if they've got a drop box, either way, do it early. That's, I think, the clearest message that anyone can give in this election cycle for us on this side of the aisle. Not often, but early, right? Is that pretty much it, Mark?
Yeah, I think that's it. Vote Builder. Vote Builder is a great tool. It should be able to help you keep track of the people who have requested ballots. And in my understanding, anyway, the people who requested ballots and do ballot chase, ballot follow-up in your precinct would be great. And again, that's one of those things on election day, having people who are available for Vote Builder to get people to the right polling place. If they haven't voted, they vote on election day, get them to the right polling place. Absolutely critical.
Yeah, and there's definitely, so the IDCCA certainly is doing a lot of chasing right now of voter application for kind of the drop-off Democratic voters, and we'll be switching, like many of our other organizations, to ballot chase as we get to September 24th, the first day that ballots are supposed to be out and available for people to use. So again, I can't thank you enough, Mark, to come out of pseudo-retirement, I'll say. And I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation, right? So again, we're going to send out the the election judge manual. There's a link to it. We'll send that out. Jillian is on the call here tonight. Hopefully we can send that all out so you guys have that. It's just another resource. The more information you have, the more informed you are, the more powerful you can be in that space to speak from authority. And that's really what we're wanting you to have. So thank you everyone for being on this call. Thank you for taking the time tonight to be here. What you're doing is so important. I cannot stress that enough. I really feel inspired by so many people that are willing to step up and serve in these capacities, in these roles, in this trying, difficult time. The choice, in my opinion, cannot be clearer. We are on the right side of history. So thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for wanting to do your patriotic duty and your civic duty at the same time. And if there's any questions, you have all of our emails, because that's how you got on this call, right? And we're here to be helpful. We want to be successful. So again, have a great night. Thank you, everyone. And I'll see you at the brunch at 6, which is on August 31st. That's something that the IDCCA is putting on, and we've got a huge host of great folks that will be speaking, but 2 in particular, Senator Cory Booker will be joining us, and Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin. So we'll see you then. Thanks so much, guys.